Welcome back to the Stats File Preview podcast. I'm Binman. I'm going to review last week's loss against the Giants up at Traeger Park at the Alice and preview our huge match on King's birthday next Monday against the Pies. Super excited. What a day that's going to be. The weather is looking good. So, 90,000 crowd. It's going to be a huge event, a huge game for those young players. So before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording this pod in southwest Melbourne, of the Boonwurrung people. Honour elders past, present, emerging leaders who are listening and who are out there. Let's jump right into the review of the loss against the Giants last week. What did I get right? Let's face it, not a hell of a lot. Disappointing loss, that's for sure. I got the margin right, or almost right. I predicted a 43-point winning margin, so that's one thing. Unfortunately, I got the team wrong. I thought we would be winning by 43 points. Obviously, they won by 40-odd points. So, impressive performance from them. They had some good players. About the only other thing I got right was that it would be a fast opening sort of game for much of it, although we struggled to move it at pace, which I'll touch on, but they certainly didn't. They cut us open on turnover, a huge part of that game. And they had the running power to really, really take advantage of that, of those turnovers. Callahan was enormous. Ash was enormous. But I got the TMP, the total match point, right. So it drifted out to 186. As I said, I thought that was still value. It started at $1.74, 174, and ended up being 189, I think. So that's about the only thing I got right. I talked about the Colt did go to Toby. I questioned it. I wondered whether that might happen, and that did, and that was fun to watch. And I thought he did a pretty good job, actually. He's been really impressive this year. I'll be really interested to see if he goes to Dacos, for instance, in this match. That'll be a key question for the upcoming match. The other things probably, I got right in terms of the importance of players. I miss Callahan. I touched on him as being one of their highest rated players. But certainly Ash was influential. That contest, Biggs versus Maxi, was important. And so, impressive performance from the Giants, I have to say. I think probably the thing that I got most wrong was, I thought we would be in great shape for this game in terms of our running power. So there's a sort of question about whether we were fatigued. We were clearly fatigued, but I think I'm confident that I was right in saying we were set for it. But just because we were set for a game doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to, to be in our optimal shape. I use the analogy of baking a cake. The high performance program has so many variables, and if you think about the high performance program of an individual athlete, in a tennis sport, for instance, they can plan their own. Each player has to have their own, but you aggregate that over 44 players on a list, and there's a lot of variables in getting things right. But it was understandable that we're struggling, given we're sort of at the halfway mark of our game. We had 11 players under 50 games, as King noted in the post-match presser. So, some fatigue was absolutely understandable. And we didn't run out the game. There's not much question about that. They pulled us apart in the last quarter, as King noted, kept the ball off us. In some ways that was probably understandable as well. I think it was hot up there. Psychologically, I suspect they hit a bit of a wall. It's really interesting. Langford had an enormous game the previous 2 weeks, really, and then in the last week in particular, against the Dogs, the previous game, I should say, and he was our second or third lowest rated player and sort of hit the wall a bit. I think fatigue was definitely a factor in that game against the Giants, but I don't think I think we were still planning and being in our optimal condition, and were confident that we were going to be, and were confident that we were going to win. And the post-match presser from King was notable for a number of reasons, and I'll touch on that in a sec. One, mainly because I think he nailed the reasons why we lost, but two was his evident frustration. That's the most frustrated I've heard him after a loss this year, King. So I did have to think, welcome to Demon Land with all of that inefficient kicking inside 50. So, I think fatigue was probably a factor in some of our skill errors. But, I think King would probably acknowledge that also, the outcoached is probably a bit overstating it, or a bit unfair on King. But definitely Kingsley had a good day in the box, and which I'll touch on in a sec. But we didn't really have answers for some of their effective tactics. So jumping into why we lost. As I said, I think that King probably nailed it in his presser. He was frustrated, obviously. We had one more scoring shots than them, which he pointed out again in his press conference he did yesterday. I thought that was really interesting. And he sort of bristled with the question. It sort of picks up what I was saying. We expected to win this game. The fact that we didn't, it was obviously frustrating for King, and he answered it that he brought up that point about last week, sort of not so much apropos of nothing, but in a defensive way, to say, well, we actually had one more scoring shots than the Giants. We had 16 more inside 50s, which he noted in his presser. We lost by 49 points. We kicked 9-16. Our expected score was below our actual score, but above our actual score, but not by much. So while our inaccuracy was a factor, it probably wasn't quite the factor that King noted, but conversely, their accuracy was phenomenal. So I'll run through the sort of all the numbers in a sec, and I'll come back to those key factors, but that King noted as to why we lost after I've just run through the key numbers. But just probably a caveat. So similar, I'm trying to remember which game it was. I think it was the Bombers game, or perhaps the Tigers game, where the caveat on the numbers was the blowout numbers in the last quarter. So I'll run through all of our key numbers across the contest, across defense, contest and offense, the three phases of footy, two of which King referenced yesterday in his presser, which was interesting. He was talking about that disconnection between midfield into the forward line. But a lot of just for context, when I do go through the numbers, it's worth keeping in mind that these are sort of informed or impacted quite significantly by the blowout numbers in the last quarter, which I ran through briefly on the Demon Land podcast on Monday. So apologies if you listen to that and doubling up here. But just to highlight some of those differentials, this one's not so much of a factor, but they had 58 more disposals in the last quarter than us, and that was that's a lot in a quarter. We've just, by way of contrast, our best quarter, our most competitive quarter, was the first quarter. We were plus 13 for disposals in that quarter. Contested possessions, I think King noted that our contest was pretty good and we were up for the fight. He noted that in yesterday's presser, and that was evidenced by the fact that we were plus 19 for contested possessions that first quarter, minus 8 in the last quarter. Interestingly, and this is probably where his frustration comes from, because he talked a lot about the impact of the clangers. But we were plus 9 for clangers in the first quarter. That really sort of suggests to me that we really lost our opportunity. It was this, we needed to take advantage of that momentum we had in the first quarter. We were moving the ball pretty well. The game was looking like how I expected it to be, transitioning from their half to our half and vice versa quickly as the game wore on. And I'll touch on that in sort of the why we lost. It became much more a forward half game for us, which created space for them. But in that first quarter was probably the one that was most illustrative of how I thought the game would look. And what was, I think plus 9 for clangers in that first quarter. tells a big tale because we just did not take advantage of when we turned the ball over and didn't put scoreboard pressure on. And who knows what the game looks like after that. I think we did hit a bit of a wall, but you never know in footy. Momentum is a really funny thing, and if we'd put scoreboard pressure on in that first quarter and maybe got out to a 2-3 goal lead, then the tactics that Kingsley ultimately put in place may not have been as effective. So I thought that was interesting. Uncontested possession was amazing. It was -2 in the first quarter, but they had 47 more uncontested possessions than us in the last quarter. It's a similar point to the disposals. They're playing keepings off and running us around, and that's reflected in the marks. They had 5 more marks in that last quarter. Interestingly, we were +4 for clearances still in that last quarter, so we dominated clearances for the entire match, really, or maybe dominated's too strong. We are sort of plus, speaking of territorial, +8 for inside 50s in the first quarter, -4 in the last. So, we lost our territory dominance in that last. We were +11 for inside 50s in that third quarter. We really didn't take advantage of that. And again, who knows if we pushed at one point in that third quarter, if we did level up, you never know. That last quarter is a blowout, as I'm sort of suggesting here. So a bunch of the other numbers were similarly sort of way out of whack in that last quarter. The big one for me was in terms of our winning the ball. We were +11.5 equity points for winning the ball in that first quarter. We were -10.9, almost the inverse in that last quarter. So they won the ball better in that last quarter, and they were using the ball better, but not dramatically so. But tough. Last quarter, and I say that by way of framing, sort of a caveat, I guess, on these numbers that I'll run through now. And a big one obviously was disposal efficiency. It was 71% of the time we maintained possession to their 80.4. Kicking efficiency 65% to 77. That really showed. In part, that was, I think, a factor, or at least influenced by the sort of tactics of we were kicking into congestion, and they had seemingly sort of unlimited space to run into, and we struggled a little bit, I think, to cover off their defensive spread or to defend their spread, obviously. But their kicking efficiency was much better than ours. King pointed this out. So 55 clangers we had for 47. So he talked about it. King talked about it being, he can't. That was the worst we've turned the ball over, and it's interesting because I think maybe it was just the missed opportunities that were in his mind, because in fact we had 59 clangers the week before. So of those clangers, we were +9 in that first quarter. So a lot of our damage, a lot of our sort of most impactful clangers were happened in that first quarter. It's worth noting for context that we had 59 last week, so more clangers last week than this week. The Dogs just didn't hurt us as much on that front in terms of impacting, hurting us from those clangers. Handball metres gained was an interesting stat in this game. We were still pretty high, 359. Our season's average is 381, so a fair chunk of that was in that first quarter. They were 464 metres gained by hand, so they were using hand to run it forward for sure. Territory, they was 5,732 metres gained by kicking to their 6,119, which surprised me a little bit. Time in forward half, smashed them. So 58-41 for the game, +17. Inside 50s, 62 to 46, as I mentioned before. We had the same number of shots and goals. Scores for inside 50 was a big, they were obviously a lot more efficient. We only scored 40.3% of the time, and we only kicked a goal inside 50 14.5% of the time. Way down on last week, it was 27% from memory. Last week, we kicked a goal inside 50, 52% of the time we kicked a goal when we went inside 50, scored, I should say, when we went inside 50 against the Dogs. Really inefficient this week, as King noted, 40.3% of the time to 52. Marks inside 50, 7 to 14. I that was one of the things I got wrong. I thought if we got our game going, and it did turn into a transition sort of back and forth game, which, whether it was by design, luck, or, I think it was partly design, it didn't get into that much to King, and I think Kingsley tactically helped with that. But that I thought that if it did get into that sort of game, we would have a big number, we'd equal at least, but certainly have more marks inside 50 than we have the previous few weeks where we've been playing that kicking long inside 50. It was 7-14, so that didn't turn out. I didn't expect us to be kicking inside 50 to that hotspot so often. I'll unpack that a little bit. I think that partly that was I think sort of that's one of the problems when you have an inexperienced side, is being able to adjust on the fly. And certainly, there were some very poor kicks inside 50, and we didn't take advantage of them. And I think particularly in that first quarter. Transition to score percentage was interesting. We did slightly better than time on our chain to score percentage, I should say, 22.9 to 21.6. We moved the ball from our back defensive 50 to forward 50 percentage was higher than theirs. 33% of the time in our chains that started in D50, we got it into our forward 50. So it wasn't a problem moving it from the back half. The problem was what was happening going in forward, and then really did feel like we were in a time machine, because, that was our problem pretty much, from 23, 24, 25. That was our key issue. Efficiency inside 50. I've never heard the word efficiency said so often in a press conferences after the game on Sunday. Defensive 50 to score percentage was better as well. We scored 18.5% of the time going from our D50. They only 11%. The game was sort of compressed, I guess. So that really surprised me. Defensive half to forward 50 percentage was 42% of the time to their 27.8. Again, so we moved the ball pretty well, actually. Defensive half to score percentage was better as well. 24.4% of the time going from our defensive half we scored. You look at these numbers, and these are the sort of numbers King would be frustrated, looking at. Well, a lot of what we wanted our game plan to look like were, in our favour. So, they went from their D50 score percentage was 15.2% of the time. It's just their accuracy and their efficiency when then they did go inside. The contest, we were plus 11 for contested possession. King noted that in the presser yesterday, that he was happy with our contest and effort. And, for me, that suggests that we were wound up for this game. I think that, we can't, there's no mulligans in this game. We were beaten by a better team on the day, and we were prepared, ready to win. I thought it was really interesting. He noted in that presser yesterday, King, that he said something along the lines that he overcoach potentially. So I wonder if there were too many messages in the young players' heads. So in the contest, ground ball gets, we're plus 11 for contested possessions, plus 1 for ground ball gets. These are pretty good numbers considering that caveat that I said about the last quarter. This has been a real good trend for us this year. We had 11 contested marks to 6, so plus 5 for contested marks. We AFL average, I've been talking about this, it's a real curious sort of thing. How challenging it is to take contested marks in footy these days. 8.9 contested marks are being taken per game this year in the AFL. We're averaging, what are we averaging? We're averaging 9.8. So we're taking more, what's that, almost one more mark a game, contested mark per game than AFL average. But in this game, we took 11 to 6, so plus 5, impressive. Clearances, total clearances, we had 8 more clearances than them in total. I'll touch on that a little bit in Kingsley's comments about that. What's that? Total clearances, centre clearances with the big one was plus 9, and we just could not hurt them from centre clearances. Defensively, they probably did a lot right in terms of that, but that they would have been furious with their inability to take advantage of the centre clearance domination. So that's a big one, plus 9. Stoppage clearances around the ground, they had 1 more than us, so that's where you get your plus 8 for total clearances. We had first possession 36 times percent of the time. first possession to and they were 28 first possessions. First possession to clearance was better too. We were 80.6 at the time when we got the first possessions. We turned it into a clearance to 78.6. So they, we definitely had the better of the raw clearance numbers. We just didn't turn that into a scoreboard advantage. Again, that would be one of the key things that King would have been frustrated about. Defensively, intercepts, they had 5 more than us. Taylor played well, I thought. Intercept marks, we had 8 more intercept marks than us. So he was quick to defend. King was quick to defend the defenders, and I think these numbers tell the tale on that a little bit. So that's excellent, 18 intercept marks, particularly given Lever wasn't in the team. They had 7 more tackles than us. We had 11 more tackles inside 50, inside our 50, 19-8. Season average is 10.2, so we had almost twice as many tackles inside 50 as our season average. AFL average is 10.5, so almost twice as many tackles inside 50 as AFL average as well. And I think that, again, speaks to a team that came ready to play, had no excuses from a preparation point of view. I think the 49 points is a little deceiving in terms of the gap, and which is why King noted that the expected score was they were only 2 up at three-quarter time. As I said on the Demon Land podcast on Monday, that was in King's mind in the post-match presser. I have no doubt that that's what he told the players at three-quarter time. That expected score was developed by Champion Data for the clubs because the clubs wanted that measure to have a better sense of actually how they're travelling in a game other than the scoreboard, or have another sense, maybe not so much a better sense. So, there was a lot to like about these numbers. And again, the caveat too is some of these numbers are really muddled with by, pretty much us putting McHugh in the rack in that last quarter. Maybe we sort of just completely hit the wall physically, psychologically. It was hot, 26, 27 degrees during that game, apparently. So, but yeah, our contest and effort and defense was pretty good. So 19 tackles inside 50 speaks to a team that, put a lot more pressure on than I expected. Again, we just could not turn that into scoreboard impact. Ruck contests, 30. We +8 for hitouts, but only so 32 to 24 for hitouts. But interestingly, I thought Briggs was a really influential player in the game. Even though we had 8 more hitouts in total, we only had 2 more hitouts to advantage, 13 to 11. I think Maxi played okay, but it was his lowest rated game for the season, which was, maybe the heat, I'm not sure, but, that probably tells in those numbers. With no Heath, only 2 more hitouts to advantage. Equity points, in terms of ball winning, we slightly won sort of reflecting our good contest numbers. Our equity points for ball winning, winning the footy, 102.6 to 99. So that's pretty impressive. AFL average is 110, so it's a bit under that, and it's also a bit under our season average, which is 112.6. But not too bad, and slightly better than them. But really, this tells a tale. I reckon this is. If I was going to pick one stat to sort of highlight where we went wrong in this game, was our ball use, back to some of our terrible sort of ball use in our 24, 25, 23 that, completely did my head in. Partly, where Cozzy had his sort of an average game as well. Our best players didn't have great games. Windsor, his ball use has been shabby, and he didn't look, I'd question whether it was a right call selecting him given his output. But yeah, ball use equity points in this game was 50, and we're averaging 61.8 this season, so well and truly under our season average. They, on the other hand, we had 50 equity points, player rating points, if you'd like to think of it that way, aggregated up for how we use the ball. They had 91.8. Like they just carved us up on turnover. A lot of those, that was not inflated. They've still got to hit the targets, but they've got some excellent kicking. Technically, they've got a brilliant kicking side, or quite a high number of players with really elite kicking skills. Whitfield, obviously, Ash, Callahan, Toby Green, some brilliant kicks in that side, and I forget the young players. The forward player was kicking beautifully as well, and that is really reflected. But it was also amplified somewhat by the way on turnover, how much space they had to run into, and so free targets to hit, and we didn't cover off those targets as well as we might our defensive spread. I noted this on the Binman podcast too. We only had 2 of the top 5 players in average speed and defence, and I went back and had a look at the numbers. Every game we've lost this year, we've had almost invariably we have the majority of the top 5 players for defensive running, average speed and defence. When the opponent has the ball. When we win, we dominate that stat. I went back and looked at all the losses, and in every single one, the opposite is true, where the majority of the players in the top 5 for average speed in defence, which is when the opponent has the ball, have been our opponents, and that was the case in this game. We didn't spread as well as we should have, could have, and that was a factor in their wicked high equity points, 91.8. For context, AFL average for ball use equity points is 51.7. So, not far off. The Giants were not far off double the AFL average for equity points, player rating points aggregated up for how they use the ball. Big factor in the game. A massive factor in the game. Just quickly, the player ratings was, I think, illustrative. Bowie, he's been awesome. Jake Bowie, he's been a massive factor. I'll speak to some of his numbers when I do the preview of the Pies game, but he's barely missed a beat since his comeback, and it really illustrates, that he. Probably the other thing, just in the context of the game, is I think our injuries this season have been underplayed because we've been winning. We're coming to the mid-season. We haven't had our bye, don't get me started. And we've had a lot of players on the injury list that it's looking a little bit better now. But nonetheless, when you lose a Salem and a Viney, what's that? That's 450 games of AFL experience and collectively 20 years of AFL preseason. So, you're going to struggle. And Bowie not being in the side, playing so well in the last since he's been back in the last few games, really shows what we missed when he wasn't in the side. He had 15 point. He was our highest rated player, 15.9. But it's it's notable that player rating would be perhaps our lowest player rating for our best player on the ground, our highest rated player all season. Cozzy. He was criticised for his performance a bit. He was still our second highest rated player, 15.4. So, I think that maybe he's a victim of the expectations. That's above his AFL career average. It's above his almost bang on his season average player rating points. So impressive performance. Again, Trent Rivers had he was our third highest rated player, 15.2. There was a question on Demon Land podcast this week about the sort of difference between the eye test and the player ratings. And I agree with that because I didn't, Trent Rivers, again, I wasn't so convinced of this game. But the rating points, that's why I like them, because they're objective, not subjective. And he was on the ground. On the ground 76% of the time. Where he got most of his points was for how he won the ball. So maybe that's why it's easy to miss it. So 10.3 of his 15 points he accrued in winning the footy. And taking contested marks, he kicked a goal, obviously set up a goal. So Jack Steele was number 4 for us. And Colt had his, I think his highest rated game of the season. I've got to check that, 14.9. Sneaky number. I wouldn't have guessed his rating was as high as that. It is inflated. That's probably unfair. He had 5.8 in that last quarter. But Maxi Gawn was the one, so our best players, Max Gawn, Cozzy Pickett, he had his second highest rated. Maxi Gawn had his quietest game of the season, 13.9%. For using the ball, Max lost. He was negative 3.4 for his equity points for using the footy. That was a factor for sure. And just some of the other players who lost points big time for using the ball was Andy Moniz Wakefield was -4, poor bugger. Harvey Langford had his lowest rated game of the season, and perhaps the heat, and he's hitting the wall a little bit after being dominant last week, as I noted before. He only had 2.8, but he was -2.6 for his ball use in equity points. Paddy Cross wasn't great either, -0.9. Blake Howes -0.9. Harry Sharp was poor with how he used the ball, -3.9. And not surprisingly, those four last players I mentioned were our lowest rated players in this game. So, Housey only had 3.1 his player rating points. Jacob Van Rooyen was an interesting one, and Frida was just above him. So Jacob Van Rooyen was only 5.2 player rating points. Frida had another average game, I thought, 5.3 rating points. Skipping through where the contested possessions, we don't really need to speak to them. I mentioned expected score. So our expected score was 70.1. The actual score was 70. So, we actually did a pretty good job of taking our chances, much better than you'd think, given King's comments in the presser. But I think his sort of mind was probably thinking about what we left on the table in the first quarter. As I said, we were +9 for clangers in that first quarter, or +8. Conversely, the Giants, they expected score was 86.5 and they banged on 119. So it was their actual score. So what's 32 and a half points above their actual score above. So on expected score, we lose that game by 16. And I think that's probably actually, particularly given so much of it was blown out in the last quarter, I actually think that, that's one of the values of the expected score. As I noted, King said that we're only 2 points of difference on expected score at three quarters. So we're in the game, even though it may not have felt like that. The last quarter was obviously disappointing. But I'm sure that there were, the 49-point result made it feel a lot worse than it was. And there were, a lot of positives to take from this game, our intent being one of them, for sure. In terms of territory, I mentioned this. So in that first quarter, this is really where I think where we lost the game to a degree. We had it in our forward half 61% of the time to 39%. Just could not do anything with that. For the match, it was 59-41. Even in that last quarter, it was 58-42. So, we dominated territory. Score sources, for them, their big one was, I mentioned this again on the D Milan podcast, was expected score from their turnover chains. So when they won turnover, on expected score, the 44.3, but their actual score on turnover was 12-2-74. We were on turnover 7-7-49. So this is sort of the point that King was making, is that on turnover we scored 49 points and it was almost bang on our expected score for turnover, which was 50.2. But if you just look at the scoring shots, we had 14 scoring shots for our on turnover, and they had 14 as well. The difference was they kicked 12-2 on turnover 74, and we kicked 7-7. Partly, that was how the turnovers, where they were won. So they were winning their turnovers in our front half and then transitioning the ball up the ground through space, where we were turning the ball over in our front half and kicking back into congestion. That's probably a factor in the inaccuracy, but nonetheless, I think that sort of again speaks to King's frustration. We had the same number of shots on turnover, just we were 25 points less on the scoreboard impact. And at the end of the day, it's all about scoreboard impact. The other scoring sources were we scored only 4 from centre bounce. Huge frustration. What did I say in terms of centre clearances? We smashed them. Just rocking back up to where the centre clearances. So in terms of clearances, we're +9 for centre clearances. So in our raw numbers, but yet we could only score 4 points. They would have been Jones would have been tearing his non-existent hair out with our lack of scoreboard impact, despite winning. So being +9 for centre bounces. They scored 19 points, and so were much more efficient, obviously. So we were -15 from centre bounces, around the ground stoppages, despite winning them despite winning clearances overall, it was 16 to 25. Turnover was the big one, 49 to 74, as I mentioned before. Points from defensive half, we actually, as I said before, we moved it from the back half okay. We just didn't score. We're averaging 39.7 this season, scored 31 in this match. We're giving up 40.6 from our defensive half this season. They scored 52. That bit of that was blown out in the last quarter as well, I think. Centre bounce attendances this week, it was not including Maxi. So Van Ruin took 8 the centre bounce attendances. Cozzy, Jack Steele, Sparrow, Caleb Windsor, and Cade Chandler were our CBA attendees. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So still running just with, it's 5. So one running with 5 mids. That's obviously where we've landed, but it's interesting thinking back to that Freo game where we ran 11 players through the midfield, non-rucks through the midfield. Ruck contests, Maxi had 52, Roo had 12, Brody Mychuk took 7, and Jeffo, he took 2 this week. Hit-outs, I mentioned them before. Hit-outs, Maxi had 30 of the 52 contests, 12 to advantage. Briggs, though, on the other hand, and Van Ruin had 12 ruck contests, but only managed 1 hit out. So, I've always rated his ruck work, but that's pretty poor numbers. Put it this way, Jefferson had 2 ruck contests and he went at 50% hit out rate. So one of those 2 ruck contests, he won the hit out. Briggs took their ruck contests, 11. He took 50 contests and he got 19 hit outs, and half of his hit outs were to advantage. That's impressive. I thought he was good. I mentioned before that I think the rucks that Maxi most struggles against are the ones who bring the heat physically and are big, strong players. Briggs is certainly that, and I'm sure that Maxi will long remember the fact that he got pushed under the ball and Briggs snapped that goal. Luckily, he had 22 ruck contests for 6. Just quickly, the pressure. It was an interesting one. I think the overall match was 156 to 178. You do not so that's a differential of negative 22. You don't win many games of footy with a differential of 22. It was not impressive from that perspective. I think that we fell away in that last quarter. Sort of take that out of the equation to a degree. Our last quarter, the pressure rating was 143 to 161 minus 18, but it was really about what they did. They brought the heat in that third quarter. They were plus 29 for pressure rating in the third quarter, plus 22 in the second quarter, and plus 12 in the first. So, they were a more experienced side. They had, 30 odd more games experience. So it was a big factor. A tough place to play footy at, and I think that showed in terms of the players. Pressure rating, Cade Chandler, he was our top pressure player. He had 57 pressure points. Tom Sparrow was next. He's been top 3 all season just about in this. Cozzy Pickett, again, always, up there in our top 4, 5, 6 pressure players. Interestingly, Jeffo, he was our 5th highest rated he was our 4th highest rated pressure player. He's averaging 24, but in this game he averaged 34. He had 34 pressure points. He's averaging 24 for the season. The other one, interestingly, who I thought didn't have a great game, and I don't think he did, but was rounding out that top 5, 1, 2, 3. Our top 5 was Bailey Fritsch. So he's averaging 23.3 pressure rating points this season, and he had 33 in this game. Probably a few players on that list who didn't apply the sort of pressure to the extent that they normally do. That's sort of the key numbers. But why did we lose? I think, as I spoke to on the Demon Lane podcast on Monday, Stephen King really nailed the key reasons in his post-match presser. He mentioned sort of the things running through forward half inefficiency. Welcome to Demon Lane, Kingy. We had 16 inside, more 50 entries, 1 additional scoring shots. Ball movement was terrible. I haven't seen us move the ball that poorly this year, King said, with just some blatant clangers which really hurt us. And I'd say that first quarter in particular, as I mentioned before, this was really interesting aspect of the game, and the way both Kingsley and King talked about it in their post-match pressure was the sort of idea that King raised and Kingsley touched on as well, that defensive issues were in large part caused by our inefficiency going in forward. And he reinforced that point that in yesterday's presser, that connection between those two phases of football, that, it isn't as simple as criticising that a defence. King was talking about our defensive vulnerability was in large part because of our turnovers and clangers in our front half. And he went on to say, on the back of our forward half clunkiness, it probably put us in some compromising positions defensively, which fueled their efficiency, I thought. I haven't seen us move a ball that poorly this year with just some blatant clangers, which really hurt us. That's the game. It's a unique ground here. It makes it harder when you turn the ball over as frequently as we did, and that's the game. So, yeah, I thought that was a really interesting concept, that idea of their efficiency in forward line and our inability to defend, or for them to be able to bring up a big score was directly linked to our sort of inefficiency going in forward. And really the reality of that was that they ran the ball from that back half super well into space. King also touched on the following issues that I think that he thought were factors. The impact of fatigue, I've touched on that. I think it was definitely a factor, but I stand by my thought that we were prepared for this game and set. We just didn't come up. Inexperience, he mentioned 11 players under 50. It was, definitely a factor in the game in terms of perhaps being able to overcome the impact of the clangers, the unusual ground, playing in a different environment, all of those things which, new experiences for young player. He mentioned the last quarter blowing things out. He also mentioned the bye, which is a big factor, and it sort of links back to the possible impact of fatigue, I guess. If I stop doing the Stats File podcast, the Stat File preview podcast, I'm going to do a podcast, Don't Get Me Started podcast, an AFL Don't Get Me Started podcast. I think the algorithm of angst would shoot it to the top of the podcasting charts, because there's so much angst-worthy stuff the AFL do, but this is just outrageous. It just is outrageous that, this team that that's a big factor is not only the Giants had had already had one bye. They had a bye this week. They got a bye this week, so they could attack the game psychologically, knowing that they've got the week off. Their players could leave it all out there, whereas our players playing in the heat, know that they've got, for almost all of them, and even the experienced one, but certainly for the younger players, the biggest game that they've played in their career is next Monday. 90,000 people, with Neil Danaher's passing, it is going to be really high emotions. It always is against the Pies. And so, for our young players and also our senior players, but particularly our younger players, our Langfords and, the players who have been so important to us this season, Latrell and others, in the back of their mind, they would know that they've got a big game to get up for in 8 days' time, and perhaps that partly explains the sort of that mentally, physically putting McHugh in the rack in that last quarter. In a way, it makes sense. Keep something in the locker once it was clear that we weren't going to win the game. I talked about this on Monday night, so I don't want to sort of belabor it and go over it again, but I really think it was a key part of the game. I think tactically Kingsley was really, really clever. And I've seen teams have done this to us under Goody before. I think they allowed us to dominate clearances. I mean, obviously they tried to win them, but I mentioned that in the Dogs game, Bevo brought 2 extras to the stoppage to mitigate our advantage at stoppages and clearances, and that was pretty effective. It absolutely was effective, both in terms of our scores from stoppages. We did better than them from scores from stoppages, but they definitely limited the damage, and they, the numbers, the raw numbers against the Dogs were pretty similar, so we couldn't leverage that to really give us territory. But in this game, I doubt. I'm pretty sure that Kingsley didn't bring any extras to the stoppages at all, and went head to head essentially. We dominated then because Maxie's the best ruck in the AFL, and we dominated territory. But I think that I wonder whether Kingsley was happy to give that territory up, because what it meant was we were often kicking inside 50 congestion. So in that first quarter, 63-37 or something like that, or 62-38 in that first quarter forward half. And we were often kicking into congestion. And I think that's where, I don't know, the challenge of a new team, such a young team, implementing a new game plan. If we had tried to implement some sort of strategy to mitigate that, that's where the experience comes in. It's pretty hard. It's a big ask for a young team to be able to on the fly adjust and maybe implement some other strategy. A lot of those, we were kicking into congestion, but nonetheless, and frustrating. I was definitely surprised we kicked as often as we did to the hotspot. And, clearly it's a tactic we're doing. I've been talking about it for weeks. It's, we're a long kicking side. We're a territory side. We kick to contest. I just think in this game, I'm guessing the rule of thumb is if there's an option, you kick it to the option. If there isn't, you kick it long to the hotspot. In this game, we defaulted to kicking it long to the hotspot. But we also, it's that is overplayed a little bit by that +9 clangers in that first quarter, which is, I think, really what was in King's mind. We just missed a lot of opportunities with those clangers where we didn't kick it to our forwards' advantage. There were a number, like my check, one over that we needed to hit them where we had players free and we missed them. So, and then, we were often kicking to congestion. If fatigue was a factor, it makes sense. As George said on the podcast, technique is one of the first things to suffer when players are fatigued. Decision-making as well. So our decision-making going inside 50 wasn't great. Our skills weren't very great. And, pretty wide open spaces, even with the congestion, and potentially also our leading patterns from Rue and Jefferson weren't great either. But that kicking into that congestion was definitely a big factor in our inefficiency. They kicked 70 points on turnover is massive. And King noted that I thought that was really fascinating that they structure up for turnover. Last week I mentioned this as well on the podcast. They scored 99 points, almost 100 points on turnover the previous week against the Lions. So, they are definitely structured up for it. When they did turn it over, they had acres of space to move the ball in, and that was definitely a big factor in their efficiency. Once inside 50, they scored 52% of the time they went inside 50, and scored a goal 41.3% of the time they went inside 50, which is nuts, which is totally nuts. But I think that's sort of connection between our inefficiency going inside 50 and their efficiency, which I thought was a really fascinating sort of aspect of both coaches' post-match sort of analysis. King said about that that this is his comments, that he talked about how their defensive structure was designed to exploit low efficiency forward entries, turning our offensive possessions into counterattacks, that sort of classic rebound footy. King said that they're an outstanding team that is structured to punish you on the transition. Every time we went inside 50 clunkily or didn't bring the ball to ground or turned it over high up, they were structurally set up to absorb that and trigger their run. They have a high-end talent. And went on to say that they know where to position themselves for turnover. You hand the ball back to them with unforced errors. You're playing directly into the hands, and that was really the case. And Kingsley, I mentioned this as well, but Kingsley said that he thought they defended clearances really well. They didn't win centre bounces, but he noted they restricted their scores. That I think that was a really big factor in the game. That even though, as Kingsley noted, we beat them in the raw clearance number. They did a great job restricting our scores. And then, a lot of our kicks, then when we did win clearances, were kicking into congestion and they bounced that straight back out and went up the other end. That interconnection between those things, I found a really fascinating aspect of this game. And, it's one of the reasons I really like Kingsley's post-match presses as well. And, it's so refreshing to hear two coaches talk about the game. That helps me as a tactic tragic and someone really, really fascinated with how this game sort of AFL footy tactically evolves. to actually get some insight into that, I'm just loving it. And it seems to be a sort of growing trend from coaches across the league, which is a really positive thing. It was a disappointing loss. I don't think it was as bad a loss as what it feels like. A lot to take out of it. Really interesting, King's sort of frustration, as I said before. Welcome to Demon Land, Kingy. The whole conversation about Traeger Park is really, for me, I don't, do we go there? Do we don't go there? It's a bit like the weather. I'm not going to complain too much about the weather. I can't do anything about it, but it is frustrating to, it's a challenge for us to go up there every year. Our record up there isn't great, so I'd be happy for that to be back at the G. But of course, there's a, financial aspect to it that you can't ignore. Okay, that's last week. That's done and dusted. Let's look forward to this week. So we've got obviously the big game, the big freeze on Monday. Super looking forward to it. I'll run through some of the key numbers and I'll talk to and some contextual stuff, injuries, etc. Bit tricky with selection this week because we don't know yet who's in, but I'll speak to that. I just sort of thought that our coach must be thrilled. Really, it's his first year AFL coach, and he gets a game all for him. So it's awesome, like a full sort of game against the Pie, 90,000 people at the G for him. It's awesome. So King's birthday game on Monday. Get along if you can. Probably tickets are all close to sold out. So let's look at some key numbers. Because the teams, the squads aren't out yet, even I don't know what the age and experience differential is in this game, but from last week, our average age was 25.2 and our average experience was 90.1 games of AFL footy. Conversely, the Pies' average age was 28.4 and their average experience is 153.2. So that's a huge gulf. And, Pies players must love the fact that they play in front of 80, 90,000 people all the time. So, not only have they got a big edge in terms of number of games experience and also age, they've also got a big edge in terms of the experience of playing huge games in front of big crowds. They've had big ones in the last just month, and the sort of Anzac Day game, the Pendles palaver. Thank God that's behind us. And so, that is something definitely that's an advantage for them coming into this game. They lose Elliott, so depending on who comes in to replace him, their age and experience will drop a little bit, though their list is pretty old, so it depends a little bit on who they bring in. Lever's coming in, AMW out. That brings, our average age up a little bit and our average experience up a little bit, but nowhere near that gap to close of 63 games of AFL experience. That's a massive gulf between the two players. On the injury front, their injuries haven't been too bad this year. They're actually going pretty well. By my reckoning, at the moment, they have 3 of their best 23 out this week. Elliott, Moore and Perryman. I don't reckon there's anyone else on their injury list that I would have in their best 23. Elliott's a big out. No doubt about that. Structurally, he's a big out. He's also a big game player who, speaking of technique and kicking, he's a beautiful kick for goal. And as often you hear on the broadcast, if you're going to pick a play to kick for your life, then he'd be well up there in the AFL. So he's a big out, but I don't think he's in their top 5 players. And so from my just how I rate their list, I guess, but from their top 5 players, I mentioned last week that it's not just the number of your best 23 out. Of course, that's important, but it's also probably equally significant, perhaps more, is of those players which are in your best top 5 players. You take them out of your team, you're going to struggle hard to you can replace them, but not fully, obviously. But I think from their top 5 players, the only one they've got missing is Moore. Moore's a big out, for a range of reasons. Structurally, his leadership, talisman type player. He's been really important to their defense. They're defensively, arguably the best team in the AFL at the moment. So he's definitely a big out. So one of their top 5 players out in more. We've got 4 of our best 23 out, I think. So Xavier Lindsay, Salem, Viney, and Cully. But as I said last week, none of them, I think, are in our best 5 players. I don't think there's much argument about that. So, really we're pretty square on the injury front. Maybe we've got the slight edge in terms of, not having any of our top 5 players out. We're actually now looking in better injury shape than, I'm just so gutted for AMW. That's awful. But we're not in too bad injury shape if you think that our best 23 out at the moment, Xavier Lindsay, Salem, Viney, and Cully. So that isn't too bad given where we've been this season. As I said, the squads aren't out yet. We know that Kenfield has been named. You assume that Lever will come back in. CJ must be a good chance. King loves him. He's really important to our run from halfback flank when we're playing our transition game, our best footy. I think he's in our best team. He helps us play that. So he must be a good chance to come in. I can't see Heath coming back in this week. There just would be too many changes. They don't really have a Briggs who can sort of smash Maxi and really, Darcy Cameron, who has been an important player for them and was important for them last week, that is for sure. He's got a critical role to play, but he's not going to stretch Maxi the way Briggs did. So I can't see Heath coming back in. He was great, though, at Casey. He looks a cut above VFL level, but really impressive. But another, what I would like to see actually is Heath plays this week at Casey, and maybe they bite the bullet and rest Maxi a 5-day break into the next game against the Bombers the following weekend on the Saturday. So hopefully, maybe that'd be the way they roll and bring Heath back into the senior team and give Maxi a chop out. I'd be shocked if Fitzgerald isn't named on the extended squad. There's a chance he'll be selected. There's talk on Demon Land that there's chatter that's going to happen. I don't know. There's a chance he'll be selected because we're clearly fatiguing. King mentioned yesterday in his media conference that, he highlighted the importance of selection integrity. Well, it's not just the 33 possessions, whatever he had for Casey. Fitzgerald, he's been dominant at Williamstown this season. So he's put a good body of work together at VFL level. He was fantastic last week. Good footy IQ, kicked a goal. He looks a good athlete. He was a defender. He's the first year as a midfielder, apparently, or first year at sort of senior level as a midfielder, and he's slotted right in there. So he would definitely add run, and we're clearly fatiguing. We need to replace, as I said, AMW's run. So, you'd think he was a good chance, but it does worry me. Like, you've got Kenfield. Do you want 2 players making their AFL debut in front of 90,000 people on Stephen's birthday? I'm not sure. But against that, he brought Cross in. King brought Cross in after one game at Casey after we added him to our list. So there's no reason to think that he won't just because he's only played one game at Casey. Bring Fitzgerald in. That is. Yeah, as I said, it does worry me though having two debutants playing their first game of footy next Monday. So it's a bit tricky. If CJ plays, it would be Lever, Luca, and CJ in. If Fitzgerald comes in, that's 4. That's a lot of changes. I think we know that AMW is going out. What I think might happen is AMW goes out. We know that Jeffo will get dropped 2 games in a row where he's been our lowest rated player. So that's 2 out. Freddie's been average the last couple of weeks, I reckon, but surely they'll want his class and experience on Monday, so I can't see him coming out. The other possibilities to get dropped, Laurie, Cross, maybe Roo. He's been average the last couple of weeks, but it's a bit similar to Fritter. I can't see him being dropped either. For that matter, I can't really see Laurie being dropped. He's been playing well. He adds run. He's, he deserves a good run in the seniors, I think. So I can't see him being dropped. They might leave Cross in the crosshairs, so to speak. Pardon the pun. But you take Cross out, then we lose his run and defensive spread. So, yeah, you bring Fitzgerald in, but it's a bit robbing Peter to pay Paul there. Maybe CJ doesn't come back in. God, it's a tricky thing. I'm not making the selection. So I'm going with Luca and Lever. We know they're in, possibly CJ in. Maybe not Fitzgerald. AMW out, Jefferson admitted. If CJ comes in, Cross goes out, but we'll see how that runs. On Luca, I'm really, really, really sort of excited that they're bringing Luca in. Penance and D is a poster on Demonland, great footy knowledge. He's lives in Perth in WA. He's really super across the WA juniors. He's been talking about Luca for some time, pumping him up. Based on Penance and D's posting on Demonland, I think that I've got real confidence that Luca's not the sort of player who will take a backward step. If Pies want to come at him, if they want to try and intimidate him, based on what Penance and D's talked about on Demonland and based on my observation of him in the preseason and at Casey this year, I don't reckon he's going to be easily intimidated. And that's exactly why I really wanted, I was thrilled that they've picked him. I really wanted him to get selected because it's exactly what we need up forward. We are still going to be kicking along to that hot spot. That's going to obviously be a key part of our game plan. Hopefully not as much. That will be dependent on us getting that wave running from the back half that we couldn't really get going against although our transition was okay, we couldn't really get going against the Giants. I think we will in this game. So there'll be a bit more opportunity for hitting up free players inside 50. So our marks inside 50 hopefully will at least equal the Pies, hopefully better at. But leaving that aside, even if we are doing that, we will still be kicking along inside 50. And I've watched the last two Casey games, or most Casey games this year. And what's most impressed me about Luca, more than his goals, is his attack on the ball, both when it's in the air, in aerial contests and in packs, and when it hits the ground. And his contested marking, as I mentioned, a couple of times in the last few weeks, has just been awesome, really powerful. In a couple of instances last week, some great contested marks, but a couple of them were really at critical points in the match. One sort of, I think, maybe pushed behind defence, but one of his goals was from smashed a pack, clunked the mark, one grab, and we really need it. So as I said, if it was my call, if it was up to me, I'd drop Jeffo. Still holding my shares on him, go back, kick some goals at Casey. I'd push JVR up to play almost as an old-fashioned centre-half forward. I just think he's better in space. I don't like when he gets into those one-on-one wrestles. He often loses them for a start. He gets outmatched by the opposition key defenders, often physically, and he just sort of not timing his jumps into packs that well. I think he's better out in space where he can run in and mark the ball on the lead and, look to be a down-the-line option if need be. Almost play at that centre forward and then play Luca as an old-fashioned full forward who smashes aerial contests at the top of the goal square. If he doesn't mark it, brings it to ground. I mentioned before how impressive our contested mark numbers are this season. Luca's just going to help in that space. Looking at the Pies overall form, they're a funny team, Pies. They're sort of ticking along. They're defensively, they've stayed in a lot of games where some other teams, and maybe this is experience, would have fallen away. And a good example was last week. But just the sort of overall thing, they're currently 11th on the ladder, so just outside the wildcard block. They're 22 points, so they've had 5 wins and the draw against the Hawks. In the last 5 weeks, so the last 5 matches, average 0.4 is is 98.6 to us, 84.2 for them. They're giving up 95 points a game. The last we're giving up 98. Our average winning margin is 35.5 in the last 5 games. Their average winning margin in the last 5 games is 10. Average losing margin 23 to 21. We're 23. Average total match points 196 to 179 in the last 5 matches. In terms of some of their numbers, so I think they've done well, given the challenges they have to be 11th, and their form is fair to middling, I think. They're just looking at the betting, so this was really surprising. This opened up even money, $1.91 a piece. But the punters have come for the Pies. So the punters expect the Pies to win this game, $1.81 to 204 with a line at 2.5 points. I actually think that is good value for Melbourne. I would have us as favourite for this game, despite sort of last week, or at the very least even money. So I think at 204, that's pretty good value. Some of their key numbers, looking at some of their key numbers for the Pies, some of their high rankings. They're third in handballs per game, so high disposal numbers. They're fourth in disposals per game, second in marks per game. Those are interconnected, obviously. They're second in rebound 50s per game. They are on. Let's have a look in terms of. They're second in uncontested possessions per game, so that at their fifth in effective disposals per game. They're second in tackles inside 50. So high possession team. A bit surprising. I was thinking, watching them, that they sort of have moved away from that transition footy that McRae really brought in as a tactical response to the sort of defensive contest and defense model that Goody had brought in and sort of leveraged off or built off the work that the Tigers did, Hardwick did. So, but, my sort of watching the game without looking at the numbers, watching the game, I'd expected, to be honest, a little bit that the Pies were less sort of transition based this season, which is the case. But looking at their transition numbers, some of they're interesting. So defensive half to forward 50, so moving it from their back half. We're 5th or 6th in the AFL, they're 9th, so there's not too much sort of difference there. Chain to score, defensive 50 to forward 50. The Pies, we're almost dead the same, so we're 7th and they're 6th. We're 8th and they're 7th. Defensive half to score percentage. We're 4th in the AFL, and this was an interesting one. We're 4th in the AFL from scoring from our back half, defensive half to scoring chain. So that's pretty impressive. Hawthorn, Fremantle, Sydney, and we're 4th in the AFL for that. That's when we're playing our best footy, is moving it from back half and scoring. That wasn't the case on the weekend. Despite defensive 50, despite the Pies defensive 50 being, as I said before, the 7th in the AFL. When you look at their defensive half to score, we're 4th in the AFL for defensive half to score percentage. They're way down the bottom at 14th. So 12.6% of the time from their defensive half they score with their chains. We're 15.7. So that's going to be a big factor in the game. So they're moving it pretty well from the back half, but they haven't been as effective at scoring from their back half. In terms of their some of their low rankings, they're 13th in points per game. So, they struggled all season to put a score on the game. So I think it goes without saying, if we can get to 100 first, we'll win this game. And that's really our advantage. Is I think that when we're playing well, we've got the capacity to score more quickly and score higher than they do. I think that's going to be a huge factor in the game, and I'm really confident we'll win this game. And I think that we'll outscore them. I think they'll struggle, particularly with more out to defend our transition and our ball movement and our scoring. This is a big factor. They're 17th in hit-outs per game. So, expect us to dominate, clearance numbers, whether we dominate scores from stoppages and clearances will be a big factor in the win. So it'll be really interesting tactically what McRae brings to the table to try to mitigate Maxi essentially, and our ability to score and win clearances and score from stoppages. 12th for inside 50s per game. So, we are up near the top. I'll find that in a second. But so we're a territory team. They haven't been able to sort of get territory, which is a big factor in why they're 13th in points per game. And they're here, the same thing with hitouts. They're 18th. They're the worst in the AFL for raw number of clearances per game. So just some of ours, I haven't spoken to these during the years, but just out of interest because we're halfway through the year, some of our high rankings is we're 5th in total points per game, which is, we are a high scoring side. And I think it's a big factor in this game. I wonder whether they will be able to defend our ability to score. Much will depend on obviously how what our shape is in physically, whether we've got the running power we need to implement King's game plan, a game plan that I was talking about last week, which was high handball meters gained and running, moving it quickly from the back half. It's interesting from a tactical point of view. So they're 18th in total clearances. And I wonder whether McRae, who, in the system versus strategy discussion that I've been talking about, the different philosophies of coaches, McRae and King are both in the strategy, I think. And I'll be really curious to see whether McRae takes a lead from Kingsley and allows us to dominate clearances and basically tries to replicate what happened last week with us dominating territory, 60-40 or something like that, but having to kick inside 50 to congestion all the time. Maybe the response is that we don't press up as hard defensively, and also when we don't have the ball from the forward line. So, again, that's probably the challenge of a young team is what is the response if that happens? Are they able to implement the changes that King might make at quarter time, half time? If we are replicating essentially what happened under Goody for so often, where we dominate territory inside 50 scoring shots, yet still lose the game because we couldn't, we lacked efficiency going inside 50. So for me, that's a big watch. But jumping back to our statistical rankings, 5th in points per game, 2nd in hitouts per game, so the inverse of the Pies, 4th in inside 50s per game, reflecting what I'm saying about us being a territory team. Let's have a look. So 4th in contested marks per game, which I noted before. Luca coming in will only help with that. 2nd in centre clearances per game. In terms of low rankings, the Pies are 13th in points per game, 17th in hit out. Did I mention that? Okay. And 16th in contested possessions per game is a critical one as well. So, we're much better in the contest. 13th in contested marks per game. So we've been marking the ball well. So those two things will be interesting. 12th, the Pies are 12th in marks per inside 50. And as I noted, they're 18th in centre clearances per game, 15th in stoppage clearances per game. So, if you're going to pick out one factor is our major advantage that we've got is our clearance work and our stoppage work. So key to us winning will be turning that into sort of a positive scoreboard or scoring differential. And, again, as I said, tactically it'll be fascinating to see what McRae brings to the table to mitigate that, extras to the stoppages, or don't do that, allow us to dominate territory and then clag up defence, play an extra in defence, which is something that they could well do. So some interesting sort of differentials on that front. Just looking at the overall stuff, we have, of the last 10 matches, it's 8-2 their way. Good Lord. So last year it was, we played them twice, 82-76 they won, and 72-71 in heartbreak. Oh, geez, there's some heartbreaks when I look through here. So they've won the last 5 of these encounters, or the 5 of our games against them, 8-2 the last 10. This is a classic game of. This is really a classic game of defense versus offense. So their rating their overall rating for attack is minus 3.3. Our overall rating for attack is plus 5.8. Defensively, they're one of the best teams in the AFL defending. They're plus 5.4 for defense, but they're minus. And we're minus 1.4. But as I mentioned as I mentioned in the preview about last week at least, we had been trending in the right direction defensively. We took a step back on the weekend, though I'll take on board King's sort of note about that's unfair to blame the defenders. In fact, he was blaming our kicks inside forward 50 and our forward line. Overall, the ranking is we're plus 4.5, they're plus 2.1. So, we're above that. For what it's worth, Willow's prediction is Melbourne by 2.3 points and 52.7% confidence rating for that. The team, sort of the overall differential numbers, as I said, so classic attack versus defense setup, it almost is sort of very, it's almost exactly aligned, conversely aligned, if that makes sense. So time in forward half, we're a territory team. We've got them for that 51.6% of the time. It's in our forward half, 49.2 for them. Contested possessions, this is, their differential. So these are their differentials with the opponents. They're averaging 9.6 less contested possessions than the opponents, Collingwood. We're 0.2 plus 0.2 differential. So they got in a high pressure, high intensity game that you'd expect next Monday, they've got to up that. That's going to be something that I think is going to be a major advantage. If they're not able to improve their contested work and their pressure rating, then I think we'll win this game. Clearances, their averaging differential is 4.3 clearances less than their opponents. We're 0.3 more than our opponents. Attacking, we're averaging 99.2 points a game. They're averaging only 82.8. I think that's obviously, offense can be a weapon. Scoreboard pressure is one of the best pressures. They've got a slightly for points from turnover. They've got two of the sort of key attacking stats. Only two are in their favour, one of which is point from turnover, but it's almost the same, 53.2 points from turnover, which is pretty high. And so they certainly will look to hurt on turnover. It's 52.7 is ours. Point from stoppages, this is massive. It speaks to what I was just saying before of all of our ratings differential, their poor work as clearances as opposed to ours and our scorage stoppages. We're averaging 40.9 points from stoppages this season. They're only averaging 23.8. I can't see like that. Like even if they do bring extras to the stoppage, that creates problems elsewhere. It means they're less able to, for instance, play an extra in defence and clag up their defensive line and make it a sort of congested battle. That's a big differential, which is partly why I think, given Maxi, I think hopefully will be in good condition. Which is why I'm amazed actually that we're not at least equal favourites. That really sort of that's a big go for Collingwood. Maybe it's Collingwood fans getting up and about, but it's generally not average punters who do that. It's the big money that comes in. So the other key numbers probably we're averaging 57.1 inside 50s to their 51, so we're getting inside 50 a lot more often. We're having more shots than them. We're scoring 45.3% of the time we go inside 50. They're 44.9. Defensively, we're giving up 97.4 points a match. They're only giving up 82.9, as I mentioned before. Points from turnover, they're defending turnover slightly better than us. They're defending stoppages better than us. So that's that inverse of the number before. So teams are only scoring 29.8 from stoppages against them this season. Teams conversely against us are scoring 40.7 points from stoppages. We don't bring extras to the stoppage. So I suspect from those numbers they likely do. It's really hard to know. I wish they talked about it more in the analysis of the game, both after and during the game. So we're conceding 40.7. They're only conceding 29.8, but we're averaging 40.9 points from stoppages this season. So if we can if we can get our average, if we can score in this game anywhere near that average of 40.9 from stoppages, I think we'll win this game. Conversely, if they can keep us to their season average of what teams score against them, it'll be a big factor in them winning. So I think that's a key battle. The rest of the defensive numbers, we're not too far behind. Change of scoring percentage is 21.3%. They defend that bit better than us. Inside 50s, their opponents have 55.6, and ours only have 52.5. So that's the only defensive stat actually that we best them in. So that'll be another interesting aspect to this game of how that will play out. Their key players, just in terms of their season ratings, obviously it goes without saying their key player is Nick Dacos, though he's not having the sort of influence. I would say he's not having the influence he's had in previous years. I mean, it's a bit like in the Cozzy situation. He's getting tagged every week. A lot of energy goes into working out how to stop him. Does Colt go to him this week? I'm not so sure. Scott Pendlebury's having an amazing season. 13.5 is his player rating this season. That's incredible given his age. He's important for them. Crisp is their next one, 12. Braden Maynard is their fourth highest rated player this season, 10.9. I think for me, though, key player is DeGoey. He's only averaging 10.6, but he's an impact player. And the other one for me is McCreary. In terms of his running power, he's sort of been a little bit less influential this year. But I still think he's an important player. For me, the other one is Cameron. So how he goes against Maxi will be critical to the outcome, as I was suggesting before. So less so in terms of his importance in that the Pies more generally, just more about his capacity to mitigate, to do some, find a way to mitigate Maxi's influence. Just on DeGoey, George on the Demonland podcast highlighted how powerful he is and how important he is to them. And best good example of that was last week. He equalled the season record of 19 of a number of score involvements by a single player in a game. He had 19 score involvements last week. That's amazing. That's incredible. And interestingly, he equalled the season record. Scott Pendlebury on Anzac Day also had 19 score involvements. Before last week's game against the Dogs, DeGoey had never recorded more than 12 score involvements in his 192 games he's played of footy. So that's a pretty big jump. So we've got to do something to make sure that he doesn't have that influence. He's another one of those talismans. And with Elliott not being in the side, I think he's the importance to him the importance of DeGoey to the outcome of this match is even more significant, I think. So I'll be curious to see what we do with him. Do you run a tag with him? Who could do that? Colt could do that. Steele could do that potentially. Maybe not a hard tag in Steele's case. Sort of Colt could do sort of something like a hard tag, but then you'd think Colt probably goes to Dacos, depending on where they play him. Key matchups, as I said before, I think key matchups will be Cameron versus Maxi. Another one will be Colt versus Dacos. And whatever we do with DeGoey, I think keys to, winning is really sort of mixed up for me with the questions to ponder is what tactics will McRae bring to the table? Here's how I see the game playing out. Somewhat predicated on it's completely predicated, let's say that, on us being in really, really good shape this week and, having the ability to cover the ground at speed and being as close as we can given the fact we haven't had a bye and, we're halfway through what is, I think, probably one of the most, if not the most demanding elite level sport in the world to play week in, week out. But they had 2 days rest after they had a flush run on the Wednesday. T1 as King was calling it in his press. I presume that means training one. They don't have their full training is Saturday. So I'm guessing that they barely are doing any running this week. they will obviously, it's sort of a cliche, but this is our grand final. Eddie Maguire, joked about that, or whatever you want to call that. Not really joked, but needled us about that for years. But this, it is for them too. This is a massive game psychologically for us. They're well and truly used to playing in front of 90,000 people, big games. Us, not so much. So that's a long way of saying that I have no doubt in my mind that this game was a target game. I don't actually have any doubt that last week was a target game either. We just didn't come up, but there's 100% this is a target game, and they would have absolutely engineered their high performance program for us to be in the optimal shape on Monday, which doesn't mean, it's a bit like I was saying before, just because they've targeted and done that work, it doesn't mean that actually is how it plays out. It is an inexact science, the high performance stuff. So there's no guarantees, but my predictions is predicated on that. I think we will look to run them off their feet. I said that last week, but more from the context, I didn't think that we'd ever be able to run the Giants off their feet. I just thought that if the game got into a sort of quick transition from one half to the other half and back and forward, that would advantage us because we'd had more run. That wasn't the case. They're an excellent running side, and they outrun us in that game. So that won't happen against the Pies. So 153, whatever it was, average game experience. The downside for that is you've got some plotters. Pendlebury's a plotter. Steel Sidebottom's a plotter. De Goey's a plotter, even though he's a powerful player. So, they lack foot speed. We don't lack foot speed. So I think we'll be wound up for this game. I'm super confident. I know I was last week, got it miles wrong, but I'm really confident in this game as well. I think we'll win. And I won't be shocked if we get on a roll and score heavily and win by, 6-7 goals. A bit gun shy from last week, but as I said, I really think that our best footy is better than their best footy. I think that they'll struggle to, if we are playing our best footy, we'll score high, 100%. We're averaging, almost 100 points per game. We've got a good body of work now. We've done a half a season, so we have got more potential to score heavily than they do. And so their best bet is to bring this game into into a sort of a dour battle where it's, they hold possession. As I said, they're a high possession side, so they will chip the ball. They're doing that a lot this year, a bit like the Lions have that model of, and how the Hawks have been playing. I think they'll look to avoid, they'll work really hard, unlike the Giants, work really hard to not allow this game to get into a transition, turnover, ping-pong game. That will be their tactical focus. I think with that, they'll probably play an extra behind the ball, but, maybe they won't be able to if they instead bring extras to the stoppage. But they might do what Kingsley did and allow us essentially to win the stoppage and their tactical focus on reducing the sort of impact, maybe the next possession after the clearance, getting back in defence, sort of flooding defence, putting extras in defence, so to force us to kick into congestion, just like the Giants did, expose our challenges with our kicking. I think that's probably more likely, but it's a risk because, if we do dominate territory, that was Goodwin's frustration. It was King's frustration. If we do dominate territory in inside 50s, we'll have our chances, even if we are kicking into a congestion. We only need to sort of go up a notch in that, and we'll hurt the Pies. So there was actually just another thing to chuck into the mix this week in terms of preview. There's a thread on Demonland that Lucifer Hero's been doing for a number of years. Shout out to Lucifer's Hero. I love it. Everyone loves it, which is quotes and from other footy forums. So this one is what they are saying at Victoria Park, which I presume Victoria Park is the name of the Pies footy forum or some such. And I'll quote here for Lucifer Heroes. I've taken one for the team, waded through 20-page of drivel for meagre returns. But here are some of the comments. The reason I'm saying them is actually, funnily enough, highlighting some of these, is that there's actually some good thoughts in here that are useful for the preview, I think. So D's of this is from the Pies Footy Forum. D's have had a bit of a form slip themselves in the last few weeks. This is a team that lost to Essendon, but make no mistake, there'll be a lot of emotion in this one. If they have any heart at all, they will lift in this game. And we do have heart. So I'm responding to some unnamed anonymous Pie fan here, but we do have heart, and I think we will lift, which is a big reason why I think we'll win, actually. Huge. It's really 50-50 this one, but the emotion might see the D's lift. I agree with an anonymous Pies fan. Huge match, big freeze, Neil, etc. All huge. I watched the GWS match versus Melbourne Giants, smashed them. True. Any player who willfully bombs it to Max Gawn will be put in stocks and have rotten fruit at them. Yes, there's less of that, I think, this year because he's not really. He does push back in defence, obviously, but all teams are obviously focused on not kicking it to him if they can. If both Pickets are allowed to run off the chain, I think this could get ugly. I'd love to see both Pickets get off the chain. And I think this is one for me is really jumped out. The only chance Collingwood have is to keep the game low scoring and dour. And I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And I think that that's going to be key to this game is McRae's ability and the Pies' ability to sort of follow out his instructions, how he goes about keeping it low scoring. And the obvious way to do that is to put extras in defence and clag it up and not allow the game to get fast and sort of kick it around, hold the ball. If they do that, what we're going to have to do, and this is what the Hawks, what we did against the Hawks, is press up, smash them. That frontal pressure is going to be key for us. Get it up in their grill and make it not possible for them to have so many uncontested possessions that they like to do to just keep it off us. Challenge is when you press up is that creates an opportunity to score on the rebound, of course, and get out the back. And the Pies, as I said before, are pretty good, at least in transitioning. They're just not putting that on the scoreboard. This one made me laugh. I don't think Melbourne are that good, actually. Fair enough. This is relevant. I worry about our boys after expending so much energy in recent weeks and gaining 2 points out of a possible 16 against the Dockers, Swans, Hawks and Dogs. And I thought that was interesting because it's not just it's not just the sort of physical energy of that. It's all of the psychological energy they will have expended with the Anzac Day, which was before that block of games, but all of the Pendle stuff. Good Lord, I'm so glad we're past that. Melbourne's a weird one. They sit inside the 8 and non-form look better, but they've lost to GW and Essendon, the two teams we've dispatched with ease, but they will be up, and the usual free kick Melbourne Charity Day will be 10 times worse than usual. I've got no idea. That person must be on drugs. The usual free kick Charity Day, you've got to be joking. Clearly never been to many Melbourne games. This is really important because this is where we've struggled. So that's why I'm actually touching on this. Some of this has got some great, interesting insight from Pies fans' perspective. We've gone from having the best defensive small forwards in the game to just Schultz. No Elliott, no Hill, no Hayes, and McCreery playing like he's halfway across Bass Strait. It's actually a really important point because we have just struggled big time in the last 2-3 years to defend small forwards. They're the ones who get off the chain. So I didn't really highlight Schultz as being a key player, but he is actually, that's a good point. So we'll need to make sure that he's not winning, dominating ground ball, gets inside 50. But I think that does, it's another advantage, particularly for us, particularly given how well Bowser's playing. This is, I feel like we're playing like Melbourne did under Goodwin, where they make sure their defence is covered before moving the ball forward. I think that is a really critical point, another really critical point. So some good thoughts here from Pies fans. They are doing that because they lack leg speed, so they cannot allow the game to get into that's the great irony of this game and where the Pies are at is what McRae brought into footy. You've got to give credit where it's due. He brought in this high transition, move it quickly from the half-back flank game plan. I just don't think a bit like Carlton, that I made the point, they don't have the athletic profile to play that game plan anymore, and they've got too many plotters. For that game plan, you need players with huge tank, but with, as I've noted a number of times, you need players who not only got a huge, big tank, but can do repeat sprints all day and run at a good clip. They're just not got those sort of players to be able to play it. And so I think I think that's spot on, that they're playing like we did under Goodwin, where they more so last year we exposed our defence. So, we were trying to move the ball from the back half and our defence couldn't cover. But in 24, this is definitely true of Goody in 23, is let's get our defence covered before moving the ball forward. And I think that's what the Pies will do. They set up well behind the ball. And so, they do a good job of slowing opposition's speed of ball movement from the back half, which allows them to get their defensive system set up. So conversely, the key for us is to break that, is to make sure we're moving it as quickly as possible to stop them getting their defensive zone and their system set up. And that's a big reason why Moore is such a huge out for them, because not only is he key to that sort of getting back, but he's a general down there in terms of getting his other defenders in the right positions. And if we can move the ball quickly, I think, again, that'll be a big factor in us winning this game, because it will disrupt their ability to get their defence set up. I love this quote. I've noticed that players who in previous years had excellent skills now appear to have lost some of them. Dan Houston, come on down. We recruit the best kicking halfback flank in the comp and have made him almost redundant at times. So I thought some of those comments were interesting and spot on, and to be honest, gives me more confidence about this game, not less. So we're looking forward to a huge game on Monday. Prediction. So I'm going to make a prediction this week. I think we'll win. I think we'll win. And I won't be surprised. I'm not going to predict a 43-point winning margin as I did last week. I think we'll win, but suffice to say, I won't be surprised if it's a 5-6 goal win, because I think if we get on top and we can get that running game, we can sort of roll over the top of them. I think if we can get that juggernaut going, they'll find it. The red and blue tsunami going. I think they'll find it hard to stay with us. I certainly hope that's the case. Can't wait till Monday. I'm really looking forward to this game. Big respect. Big shout out to Neil Danaher, Valet Neil. A huge sort of respect and shout out to the extended Danaher family. My sincere condolences to everyone who for Neil and his family and everyone who loved Neil Danaher. It's going to be an interesting experience on Monday because hopefully just the sort of moment of how significant it is in terms of Neil Danaher passing before it will go a long way to making it, dare I say it, a bit more collegiate atmosphere at the MCG with Pies fan than it has been in the past. I think I heard a quote from Maxi said that this is one of the biggest games will ever play in his career. And I think I got this right, but seemed to imply also almost as big as the grand final. I think he had a close relationship. I know he did with Neil Danaher, as all of the Melbourne players did. I think a lot to play for, but also as our season shapes up, it's actually now, given that we've dropped the last two games, it is super critical we get the 4 points just from a season perspective. I mentioned it's critical for us to finish in the top 6, but if we can't finish in the top 6, the next bet is between 7 and 10. And so we're competing directly with the Pies for one of those spots. So it's an 8-point game from that perspective, a lot riding on it. Emotion will be high. I'm really confident we'll be in great psychological shape, hoping that we'll be in great physical condition to play this game. And let's see it plays out. We'll review the game on Monday and Tuesday on the Demonland podcast, and I will unpack it from a statistical perspective next week ahead of and preview the game that we've got against the Bombers the following week. Thanks for listening. I've been Binman. Go Red Leggers!
It's a grand old flag, it's a high-flying flag, it's an emblem for me and for you. Well, it's the emblem of the team we love, the team of the red and the blue. Well, every heart beats true for the red and the blue, as we sing a song for you. Should old acquaintance team played fine in the year 39. We're the team that no one can lick. And you'll find us there after the final bell with the spirit of 1926. Every heart beats true for the red and the blue as we first sing this song to you. Should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye